The glass doors of the luxury store swung open, and a hush fell over the room. A humble farmer, clad in dusty, worn-out clothes, stepped inside, his weathered boots leaving faint marks on the polished marble floor. The air seemed to thicken as every head turned, eyes narrowing in disbelief. The manager smirked, already preparing to dismiss him, while the other customers exchanged whispers. But no one could have predicted that this unassuming man would shatter their assumptions and expose a truth so profound that it would forever change the way they saw the world. What secret lay hidden beneath this ordinary appearance? In the heart of the bustling city stood an opulent luxury store, its grand facade gleaming under the midday sun. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of fine leather and polished wood, while shimmering chandeliers cast a golden glow on the lavish displays. Wealthy customers browsed the shelves, their conversations a soft murmur that blended with the distant hum of the city outside. Through the grand doors walked a humble farmer, his clothes patched and faded, his boots scuffed from years of labor. His presence was jarring against the backdrop of wealth and opulence, and the store seemed to pause as he stepped inside. The manager, a sharply dressed man with an air of superiority, raised an eyebrow and sneered, his eyes scanning the farmer with thinly veiled contempt. He whispered something to a nearby employee, who chuckled, their laughter cutting through the quiet like a knife. At the far end of the store, near a row of exquisite displays, stood a quiet customer. He was dressed simply, his demeanor calm and composed, blending easily with the surroundings. He observed the farmer with quiet interest, his eyes sharp and thoughtful, though he said nothing. As the farmer moved further into the store, the quiet customer's gaze never wavered, as though he were waiting for something only he could foresee. The farmer stepped cautiously across the gleaming floor, his boots leaving faint impressions that seemed out of place in such a polished environment. His weathered face carried the marks of years spent under the sun, and his simple patched clothing was a stark contrast to the suits and designer dresses of the other customers. He moved with quiet determination, scanning the shelves for something special. At the counter stood the manager, his neatly pressed suit and slick-back hair, a perfect match for the store's luxurious aura. He glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he took in the farmer's appearance. With a subtle nudge to the young employee beside him, the manager leaned in and whispered, "What do you think he wants?" Directions to the exit. The employee stifled a chuckle as the farmer approached. "Good afternoon," the farmer began, his voice steady but soft. "I'm looking for something special for my wife." The manager arched an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Something special?" he repeated, his tone laced with incredulity. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The farmer nodded, his resolve unwavering. "It's her birthday soon," he explained, pulling a small, neatly folded envelope from his jacket pocket. "She's worked so hard all her life. I've been saving for months to get her something nice." The manager's smirk deepened as he took the envelope, weighing it in his hand before peeking inside. He let out a short, sharp laugh and tossed it back onto the counter. The sound of crumpled bills and coins spilling out drew the attention of nearby shoppers. They turned to watch, their eyes flicking between the farmer and the manager, curiosity mingled with disdain. "This?" the manager scoffed, gesturing toward the contents of the envelope. "This won't even get you a keychain in the store." His voice carried, and a low murmur rippled through the room. Customers began to whisper, their expressions ranging from amused to uncomfortable. The farmer's cheeks flushed, but he held his ground. "I don't need anything extravagant," he said quietly. "Just something that would make her happy." The manager shook his head, feigning pity. "You'd be better off at one of those budget stores. Maybe a secondhand shop?" "This," he said, waving at the opulent displays around them, "is for people who can afford it." The farmer swallowed hard, his fists clenching at his sides. "I've worked hard for this," he said, his voice steady but strained. "She deserves something beautiful." "Beautiful?" the manager repeated with a laugh. "Do you know what beautiful costs here?" He stepped aside, pointing toward a delicate gold bracelet encrusted with tiny diamonds. "That's beautiful. It's also 3 months' rent for someone like you." The farmer stared at the bracelet, his eyes softening. It was perfect. It reminded him of his wife's gentle nature, her quiet strength. How much is it? He asked hesitantly. The manager sighed dramatically, as if the question itself was an inconvenience. This one? Over $5,000. He leaned forward, his smirk returning. Would you like me to put it on hold for you? Maybe come back in a year or two? A ripple of laughter passed through the room. The farmer's shoulders sagged under the weight of the humiliation, but he refused to look away. I've been saving for this, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Saving? The manager chuckled, crossing his arms. Sir, no offense, but you'd have to save for a lifetime to afford anything here. Why don't you save yourself the embarrassment and leave now? The farmer stood frozen, clutching the envelope in his hand. The murmurs around him grew louder as the other customers watched the exchange unfold. A woman in a sleek black dress whispered to her companion, What's he even doing here? The man beside her shook his head, muttering, Some people just don't know their place. The tension in the room was suffocating. The farmer's throat tightened as he tried to find the words to defend himself, but none came. He took a shaky step back, the ridicule pressing down on him like a weight. Just as he turned to leave, a calm, authoritative voice rang out from the far corner of the store. Is this how you treat your customers? The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward the source of the voice, a man who had been standing quietly near a display of watches. He was dressed simply, his demeanor understated, but there was something in his tone that commanded attention. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the manager. The manager stiffened, his confident smirk faltering. Sir, The man raised a hand, cutting him off. His gaze shifted to the farmer, and his expression softened. You said you've been saving for months, he said, his voice steady and kind. Tell me, what were you hoping to get for your wife? The quiet customer, now standing near the counter, took a deliberate step forward. His calm yet commanding presence seemed to shift the entire energy in the store. The other customers, who had been silently watching the exchange, turned their attention to him, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The farmer looked up, his embarrassment momentarily giving way to curiosity as the man approached. His simple clothes and gentle demeanor were a stark contrast to the opulence of the store, yet there was an air of authority about him that no one could ignore. The manager stiffened, his earlier smugness faltering as he glanced at the man. Excuse me, the man said softly, addressing the farmer directly. His voice was calm and kind, carrying a warmth that immediately put the farmer at ease. I couldn't help but overhear. You mentioned you've been saving for months for a gift. May I ask what the occasion is? The farmer hesitated, glancing nervously at the manager, who now looked more uneasy than ever. Slowly, he turned his attention back to the man and replied, It's my wife's birthday next week. She's been through so much, and I wanted to give her something special. The man nodded, his gaze steady. She must be a remarkable woman, he said. Would you mind telling me about her? The farmer shifted uncomfortably, unused to being the center of attention, but something in the man's tone encouraged him to speak. He took a deep breath and began. Her name is Maria. We've been married for 30 years. She's the strongest person I know. His voice softened, filled with emotion. We've had our share of hard times. The farm hasn't been easy to manage, especially with the weather the way it's been these past few years. But she's always been there, working alongside me, never once complaining. The man listened intently, his expression unreadable, but his eyes full of empathy. The other customers, too, seemed drawn in, their earlier judgment giving way to quiet reflection as the farmer continued. She gave up so much, the farmer went on, his voice growing steadier. She wanted to be a teacher when she was young, but when we got married, she put all that aside to help me on the farm. She's the reason we've made it this far. Even when things were at their worst, she kept us going. She deserves so much more than I can ever give her. The man tilted his head slightly, his gaze softening. And this gift, he said gently, you believe it will show her how much she means to you? The farmer nodded, his grip tightening on the crumpled envelope in his hand. I know it's not much compared to what others can afford, but I just want her to feel appreciated. She's given me everything, and I want to give her something that shows her how much I love her. There was a long pause as the man considered the farmer's words. Around them, the store had fallen eerily quiet. The manager, who had been standing rigidly by the counter, seemed to shrink under the weight of the silence. The other customers, who moments ago had been whispering and sneering, now stood in awkward stillness, their expressions reflecting a mix of guilt and curiosity. The man finally spoke, his voice firm yet kind. "It's not about the cost of the gift," he said, his words directed as much at the room as they were at the farmer. "It's about the love and thought behind it. That's what makes it valuable." He turned to the manager, who flinched slightly under his gaze. "And you," the man said, his tone sharper now, "didn't think to ask any of these questions? You looked at him and assumed he didn't belong here, didn't you?" "Sir, the manager began, but the man raised a hand to silence him. "There's no excuse for treating someone with such disrespect," the man continued. "You judged him based on his appearance, but you never stopped to consider his story, his intentions, or the sacrifices he's made." The manager's face turned crimson, and he lowered his head, unable to meet the man's eyes. The tension in the room was palpable, but the man shifted his focus back to the farmer, his tone softening once again. "You said the bracelet reminded you of your wife," he said. "May I ask why?" The farmer hesitated for a moment, then answered. "It's simple but elegant," he said. "Just like her. She's never cared about fancy things, but I know she'd appreciate something as beautiful as this." The man smiled faintly, nodding in understanding. He reached out and picked up the bracelet, holding it up to the light. "You're right," he said. "It's beautiful, and so is the thought behind your gift." The farmer looked at the bracelet, his expression a mixture of longing and sadness. "I don't think I can afford it," he said quietly, his voice tinged with defeat. The man's eyes sparkled with an emotion the farmer couldn't quite place. "Let's not worry about that just yet," he said cryptically, placing the bracelet back on the counter. At that moment, the atmosphere in the store shifted. What had begun as a scene of humiliation and judgment was now charged with anticipation, the quiet customer's actions casting an entirely new light on the situation. The farmer stood uncertainly, still unaware of the full significance of the man before him, while the other customers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they were witnessing something far more significant than a mere transaction. The quiet man's presence seemed to grow heavier as he turned fully toward the manager, his calm demeanor now replaced by an air of authority. The store fell into an uneasy silence, the kind that demands undivided attention. The man's eyes locked onto the manager's, piercing and unyielding. "You," he began, his voice steady but sharp, "have insulted one of my customers, and this is not how I run my stores." The words hit the manager like a physical blow. His confident posture crumbled instantly, his face draining of color. He blinked rapidly as if trying to process what he'd just heard. "Your stores?" he repeated, his voice trembling. "Yes," the man replied firmly. "My stores. I am the owner of this entire chain, and I've just witnessed you treating a valued customer with nothing short of contempt." The room erupted into a collective gasp. Customers who had been watching in silence now exchanged shocked glances, their earlier judgment turning into disbelief. The young employee standing nearby froze, his hands clenching nervously. The manager opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I I didn't know," the manager stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean—" The owner cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Didn't mean," he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You didn't mean to mock him, to belittle his effort, to make him feel small in front of everyone here?" He gestured toward the farmer, who stood frozen in shock, clutching his envelope of savings. I I thought," the manager began, his face red with shame, but the owner didn't let him finish. "You thought," the owner said coldly, "that you could judge someone by their appearance. You thought that his clothes or his savings made him less deserving of respect. But you thought wrong." The tension in the room was palpable, every word landing with the weight of undeniable truth. The manager's head hung low, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by regret. "I'm so sorry," he mumbled, glancing at the farmer. "I truly am." The farmer, still trying to process what was happening, looked between the manager and the owner, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Sir," he said hesitantly, addressing the owner, "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was just trying to buy a gift for my wife." The owner turned to him, his expression softening instantly. "You didn't cause any trouble," he said kindly. "In fact, you reminded me of what's truly important." He stepped forward, picking up the gold bracelet the farmer had admired earlier. Holding it carefully, he turned back to the farmer. "You said this reminded you of your wife because of its simplicity and beauty, and you've been saving for months to make her feel special. That's not just admirable, it's extraordinary." The farmer's eyes widened as the owner extended the bracelet toward him. "Please," the owner said, "accept this as a gift from me. It's not just about the bracelet, it's about honoring the love and effort you've shown." The room seemed to hold its breath. The farmer stared at the bracelet, his hands trembling slightly. I, I can't accept this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's too much." "It's not too much," the owner insisted gently. "It's exactly what your wife deserves, and it's the least I can do to make up for how you were treated today." Tears welled up in the farmer's eyes as he hesitantly reached out and took the bracelet. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you so much. My wife she'll love this." The owner smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on the farmer's shoulder. "You've done more than enough for her. This is my way of showing appreciation for people like you. People who work hard, love deeply, and never stop giving." The other customers, who had been watching silently, now erupted into applause. The once judgmental whispers were replaced by murmurs of admiration and shame. Some nodded in approval, while others exchanged guilty glances, realizing they too had judged the farmer unfairly. The manager, still pale and shaken, looked at the owner. "I'm truly sorry," he said again, his voice full of regret. "It won't happen again." "It better not," the owner said firmly, his gaze hard. "Because if it does, you won't be managing anything." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, before adding, "Remember, respect is non-negotiable, no matter who walks through those doors." The manager nodded, his head bowed. "Yes, sir." With that, the owner turned back to the farmer, his expression once again kind and gentle. "Go home and give this to your wife," he said, "and tell her she has a husband anyone would be proud of." The farmer nodded, tears streaming down his face as he clutched the bracelet close to his chest. "I will," he said. "I'll never forget this." As the farmer left the store, the other customers parted to let him pass, their faces filled with a mix of awe and humility. The owner watched him go, a faint smile on his face before turning back to the store, and the staff, who now stood silent and reflective. The lesson hung heavy in the air. Kindness and humility will always triumph over judgment and arrogance. The farmer clutched the elegant bracelet tightly in his weathered hands, his heart heavy with gratitude and disbelief. He turned to the owner, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice trembling. This, this means more to me than you'll ever know." The owner placed a comforting hand on the farmer's shoulder, his expression warm and genuine. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "Your love and dedication to your wife are thanks enough. Go home, give her this gift, and remind her how special she is." The farmer nodded, a soft, grateful smile breaking across his face. He took one last look at the bracelet, its brilliance catching the light, before tucking it carefully into his pocket. With a final bow of his head to the owner, he turned and made his way toward the door. The other customers, who had watched the entire exchange in stunned silence, stepped aside to let him pass. Their earlier judgment was now replaced by quiet admiration, and some even nodded respectfully as he walked by. As the doors closed behind him, the owner turned back to the manager, his expression hardening. The room, which had been filled with murmurs of awe, grew silent once more. "You," the owner said, his voice firm, "have a lot to learn about respect." The manager, still pale and shaken, nodded quickly. "I'm so sorry, sir," he stammered. "It won't happen again. I promise." The owner's gaze remained steady. "It better not," he said sharply, "because if it does, you won't be working here anymore. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir," the manager mumbled, his head hanging low. The owner took a deep breath, his voice softening slightly. "This store represents more than just luxury. It's about offering an experience of dignity and respect to every single person who walks through those doors. If you can't understand that, you don't belong here." The manager nodded again, his face flushed with shame. "I understand," he said quietly. Satisfied, the owner turned his attention to the remaining customers, who now stood in reflective silence. His voice carried across the room, calm but firm. "Let today serve as a reminder for all of us. Never judge someone by their appearance. Kindness and humility can surprise you in the most unexpected ways." The words hung in the air, sinking deep into the hearts of everyone present. One by one, the customers nodded, their expressions thoughtful. Some glanced toward the door where the farmer had exited, their faces filled with quiet regret for their earlier assumptions. As the store began to return to its usual rhythm, the owner walked back to his original spot near the watches. But his presence and the lesson he imparted lingered like a quiet echo. The farmer's story would not be forgotten, not by the staff, the customers, or the manager who had learned a life-changing lesson that day. Outside, the farmer walked through the bustling streets, the noise and chaos of the city fading into the background. His steps were lighter, his heart fuller, and his mind racing with thoughts of how his wife would react. For her, it would not just be the beauty of the bracelet, but the love and effort it represented. It was a gift that carried a story of humility, kindness, and the unexpected generosity of a stranger. And somewhere in the city, beyond the farmer's view, the world carried on, unaware of how one small act of kindness had changed so much in the span of a single afternoon. As the story comes to a close, one truth becomes clear. It's not the price of a gift, but the love and effort behind it that truly matters. The farmer's humble journey, driven by devotion to his wife, serves as a reminder that kindness, humility, and respect hold more value than any material possession. Sometimes it's the most ordinary people who teach us the greatest lessons. What about you? How would you have responded in this situation? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And remember, a small act of kindness can create a ripple that changes lives in ways you might never imagine.